Hi, good afternoon from my side. This is Daniel Pacheco, and this is the European Try to keep you here, not to connect with doing the video. For those of you who regular value of the company, for those of you who I will do this CSA for 10 years. My role at the time is to CEO and to the Technical Institute. My field as a team, quite programs to the CSA that is clear about the major in the one is the STAR program, the other one is the position of the very core of the STAR program. So the STAR program is essentially based on three fundamental pillars. From we got the technical standards, we got the certification and attestation standards, and then the STAR registry. What I'm going to discuss with you today is the cloud control matrix. Now, since this is an event for chapters, the general assumption is that you are already very familiar with the cloud control matrix. And what I'm going to discuss with you today is really the version 4 of the CCM. Now, CCM, as you know, has been around for quite some time, 11 years to be precise. The first version was released back in 2010. When we created CSA, and at that point I wasn't yet with the Cloud Security Alliance, the idea was to create a framework, a control framework specific to cloud computing. A way to support the industry in understanding the fundamental security principle and the fundamental controls to be applied within a cloud infrastructure, as well as platform and applications. Of course, CCM is not just that, it's more than that. It represents, if you like, a sort of way to establish a common vocabulary between the various stakeholders in the cloud supply chain, a way to have a common way from both cloud service providers and cloud customer to understand what are the responsibilities that each one of the two parties has to take care of, and somehow to set the expectations of the customer, and therefore to lead them in a mature approach towards governance, risk, and compliance in the cloud. And of course, as I mentioned a second ago, CCM is really, the backbone of the STAR program. Is really that foundational standard that is used in any of the levels of the STAR program. One of the other key features that I'm sure all of you is very familiar with is also the alignment with other standards. When CCM was created, of course, it was not the first security standard out there. The ISO 27001 was already out there, and many others cybersecurity control framework. So what we wanted to do was to establish a clear connection between those existing general purpose security standard and CCM. So to make sure that a company that had already a security program based, let's say, on PCI DSS or ISO 27001 or NIST would have a natural transition between a non-cloud environment and a cloud environment. Now, with the release of version 4 of CCM, we wanted to make a sort of step up and provide some additional support to the user of CCM, because very often we have received input that a simple set of controls is certainly, a huge help for organization, but they needed more guidance, both in terms of implementation, but also in terms of auditing. And what you can see now on screen is really the set of components of the CCM. So we got implementation guidance, auditing guidance, the CAIQ, which was mentioned also by Ailina during her introduction, which is really that set of questions, and I'm sure you're already familiar with it, that are guiding our cloud customer in asking the right questions to the cloud service provider. Then, of course, the mappings, and then another new component of the CCM, which are the metrics, with a catalog of metrics that we released a couple of weeks ago. And then there are also additional components that are going to be released as we are going to move forward, like, for instance, a light version of CCM or a SaaS set of controls. And then, of course, some sector-specific set of controls. This is happening already now. We have a number of activities ongoing, especially in the financial sector space, and we are trying to align with other existing framework that are specific to the financial sector. Now, this is somewhat the timeline for the release of the various components. So back in January of this year, we have released the core controls of the CCM V4. Then in February, some initial mappings, and especially the connection with the CCM version 3.1, so to have a smoother transition between the previous version and the current version of CCM. And then the mappings with all the family, the ISO 27001 family, so 27001, 27002, 17, and 18. Then in June, we released some additional mappings with CIS V4 controls and ICPA trust and service criteria. And alongside with that, the CAIQ version 4, which was very much waited for from our community, because everyone was very keen to make a submission of our in our STAR program based on the CCM V4. In September, we released the implementation guidelines, and then in October, as I mentioned, the metrics. Now, between the end of the year, so December, and possibly the beginning of the next, we are going to release also the auditing guideline, which are going to be a tremendous support, especially for those organizations that are very much into the STAR program and they have already achieved level 2 of the program. And then, of course, additional mappings with PCI DSS, NIST 853, and then more to come in 2022. In terms of differences between version 3 and version 4, so first and foremost, we changed the structure of the domains. We moved from the 16 domains of version 3 to the 17 of version 4. There is an additional domains, which is the one of logging and monitoring. Beside that, there's been also some additional changes in other domains. Some of them has been restructured. Some of them have now a slightly different scope. In terms of number of controls, there's been quite a substantial growth. So we moved to 197 control compared to the 133 of the previous version. So a net new almost 40% of controls. Now, don't be too scared, because in some cases, the fact that we have more controls is a consequence of the fact that we have been splitting some of the more dense controls of the previous version in smaller parts, so to make it more auditable, if you like. And then other changes that we applied, we have done quite a lot of work on one of the key points of the in the cloud computing security, which is the shared responsibility model, and I'm going to touch upon it in a second. Here you can see who has been engaged, and the approach that we have taken in the creation of version 4 has been very systematic, and we wanted to have a good representation of all the three main categories of stakeholders that constitute our constituency. So the enterprises, the cloud service provider, so enterprises as cloud customer, of course, the cloud service providers, and the representatives of the assurance community, so consulting firms and auditors. All in all, we have had over 70 professionals contributing to version 4. So a lot of brains that we managed to put together to create quite an impressive end result. And of course, I'm a little bit biased, but I think it's a very, very good product. Now, why we wanted to move to version 4? Well, first of all, because, as natural, any standard, it goes through a process of obsolescence. So CCM V4 has been, V3 has been in the market for quite some time, and it was really the need of making an update in order to better reflect the new technological landscape of cloud. So a number of advancements that were done between version 3 and version 4 really concern the area of serverless, containers, microservices, and a lot of more maturity in the space of encryption and key management. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, we wanted to make sure that we were going to have a set of controls that were easy to understand, easy to implement, and above all, easy to audit. Here, a summary of what is new. So, as I said, improved clarity, better control realignments in a way that within each one of the domains, we always started with a policy level controls, then to move down to procedures, and then to detail some of the technical measures to be implemented. We improved dramatically the share responsibility model, trying to be much more precise on who is trying to define much better who is responsible for what, and try to further detail that the gray area, which is the share responsibility. So whenever there is a co-ownership of the control between the cloud customer and the cloud service providers. Here you can see, you have a sort of summary of the changes in each domain. I would like to call out your attention, especially on some key domains, like for instance the one of encryption and key management, where we moved from 4 controls to 21, because in this case we really wanted to have a very detailed set of controls on the full life cycle of the key management. Another area where we made quite a lot of changes has been the area of data security. Of data security and lifecycle management that has been including the area of privacy. So we moved from 7 control to 19. I already talked about encryption, and another domain where a lot of changes have been happening is the one of the GRC. So first of all, this domain that it was initially governance and risk management became governance, risk management, and compliance. There's been quite a consolidation of controls there. Another area where a lot of changes has happened is in the one that used to be the mobile domain. Now is called universal endpoint management, and of course the focus has been more on the endpoint security rather than on the generic term of mobile, which was somewhat very confusing. I already mentioned the changes in the area of the DSI domain. Logging and monitoring is a net new domain, really. Here we wanted to make sure, since logging and monitoring is such a crucial area in cloud security, we wanted to create a dedicated domain for it. So we took a number of controls that were scattered around other domains, and in order to create a dedicated domain on logging and monitoring. And then finally, set of substantial changes have happened in the supply chain domain, where we have been focusing a lot on the supply chain, the accountability within cloud, and of course the share responsibility model. Here you can see an example of one of the STA domain, STA controls, and here you can see how we have been, detailing in this column that is called SSRM, Security Share Responsibility Model. If each control, depending on the cloud implementation approach, is owned by the cloud service provider, by the cloud customer, or is co-owned. This attribution of responsibility, it becomes even more clear in a second, now that I'm going to show you the new CAIQ submission form. which is the one I'm going to introduce to you. Even in CAIQ, we have been having quite a few changes. In CAIQ, compared to CCM, we reduced the number of questions. So we moved from 310 questions of version 3.1 to 261, so less questions. And there is more of a sort of one-to-one relationship between a control in CCM and a CAIQ question. So that the process of implementation and this translation of a control into a question, into the right question to be asked to the cloud service provider, it becomes more straightforward. This is what I was mentioning a second ago. So now, every time a company is going to make a submission for star level 1, you can see that they need to detail if that control is owned by the cloud service provider, which is the first option, is owned by the cloud service customer, option 2, is if it is outsourced to a third party, which is often the case, right? Especially if you are, let's say, a SaaS vendor, then you typically outsource, let me use that term, some of the security to your infrastructure provider, to the infrastructure provider on which you're building your service. Or if there are the two options of that control is shared between the cloud service provider and the customer, or between the cloud service provider and the third party. In this way, we can give better indication to the cloud customer whenever is making an evaluation of the cloud service provider. It's much more precise, perhaps a bit more time consuming in the phase of submission of star level 1, but definitely a much more relevant set of data that can be used during the risk analysis of a cloud service customer. This is essentially what I just said, and it's a more of an explanation of the various options that we have in the security share responsibility model. This is the important, I think, John Di Maria, we will be presenting towards the end of the day, is going to go over this presentation. But essentially, this is the impact of the CCM V4 on the STAR program, with the timeline for the transition between version 3 and version 4. And as you can see, now companies are already allowed to make submission based both on level 1 and level 2 based on version 4, and then the ultimate date for ending of the transition is going to be July of 2023. With that said, just to summarize, so CCM V4 really is somewhat a reflection of market change, both in terms of legal and regulatory compliance and in terms of technical changes. We wanted to make sure that we were improving the usability of CCM, providing additional guidance both for implementation and for auditing. And then this is just to say that we conceive CCM as an important milestone, but it's for us really a starting point. We see CCM version 4 as the beginning of a journey towards the excellence, towards the creation of what we believe is going to be once and for all the reference for any companies that wants to achieve a higher standard of cybersecurity and privacy in the cloud. With that said, this is a couple of few additional resources that you can use. And if there are any questions, I'm going to be more than happy to answer. The contact that you got there is for our CCM working group program manager, Lefteris Koutaris. And so if you are interested in joining the CCM working group, please feel free to reach out to him. And we need more brain power to make CCM V4 even better. So please help us with that. I don't know if there are any questions. All right. Let me see. Hi, Brooke.
There's a couple questions that have come in that you can find in the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen.
Will companies be required to move to this new version if they've done this? So as I was explaining when I went through the timeline, there isn't yet a requirement. So at this point, you are still allowed to make a submission on either version 4 or version 3, depending on your needs. Of course, we encourage organization to move as quickly as possible towards the version 4. We are going to accept submission on level 1 until, I guess, June of next year. After that, you will be forced to make a submission on version 4. And then the other question, are the implementation guidelines specific to a cloud service provider? No, they are not. And this is obviously, both of them very good questions. So the implementation guidelines, they are more of additional, let's say, recommendation on how you can better, it's both. Either a way to implement a certain control at a high level, or additional details of additional measures that we recommend you to do. Because very often when we define a control, we cannot always strive for the best possible solution, but we need to make sure that control it represents a very high bar, but not necessarily something that only few companies can achieve. And the implementation guidelines are providing those like should clauses in order to provide you with additional measure that you would like to implement. There is an appetite to develop technology-specific or platform-specific controls, but for that we will need the support of some of the technology vendors, because certainly it's not something that is a work that CSA is not going to embark on its own. And can I have a copy of the slide? Yes, I guess so. I think all the slides are gonna be shared.
It looks like we have one question from Derek. You can unmute and go ahead and ask.
Hi, Derek.
I've already asked my question.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, you're gonna get the slide. All right. Okay, that's okay. This it has been noted that okay, as concerning the SAS and CCM Lite, this is a conversation that is currently ongoing within CSA, as we are investigating the options of having either both have a SAS version and a Lite version, or a single artifact that is going to essentially address both at the same time. It's very much a matter of scope. We are, as I said, investigating the two options, and I guess we are going to have a more clear determination on what is going to happen towards the end of this year, early 2022. And for sure, as soon as that determination is going to be made, we are going to reach out to the chapter to let you know what's the game plan for that. All right.